Open with me to John chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. John 2, 1 through 3. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine."
Thanks, Liz, for reading. For that great song, Pastor Josh. And Dawn, love the announcements. Changed my life, thank you. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, it's a joy to come together as your children, to worship you as a family, to submit ourselves to you, to grow together, to learn together. Lord, we think of those who aren't with us today. Think of those who are at home sick. Ask that you would bring healing to them. Lord, our friends and family who may be deployed away on a business trip, we ask that you would watch over them, encourage them on Sunday, protect them, bring them back to us safely. Lord, for those who have walked away from you, we ask that you would minister to their hearts and convict them and bring them back to you in a way that's loving and kind. And Jesus, for us who are here, we ask that you would impact our lives by your word, and it would be men and women who are changed, not only hearing your word, but living it out and doing your word. Lord, I humbly commit myself to you and my words to you, and ask that they be of your spirit and words that are true and loving, that we would all be changed by your word. And it's in Jesus' name, amen. Well, it's not easy being a mom. I'm not one. I don't know by experience, but I live with one, and I see what you guys go through, and it seems pretty tough. So maybe you can relate to the young mom who made an appointment with her pastor to confess all of her shortcomings as a Christian mom. So it's a Tuesday morning, she walks into the pastor's office. "Good morning, pastor." "Good morning." Tiredly, she plops into a seat and she lets her confession begin. "Well, first, pastor, I want to tell you, I've been helping with the nursery for a number of years, but now I have a baby and I'm kind of tired of dealing with babies all week, so I can't take on any more on Sundays. I can't help out in the nursery. I'm sorry." Pastor thinks about it and he says, "Well, you're forgiven." So then she says, "Well, there's another. I used to help out with the homeless program we do on Saturday mornings, but now that's my only morning to sleep in because my husband's home. I can't really do that anymore. I'm just too tired." Pastor thinks about it. "Man, the homeless, what are they going to do?" "Okay, you're forgiven," he says. "Pastor, there's one more, and this one's bad, pastor." Okay, the pastor's ready for it. He can handle it. She says, "Every morning, I set my alarm clock for 30 minutes early so I can wake up and read the Bible and do my devotion, have a quiet moment with God. But my alarm clock wakes up the baby. I can't even do a devotion." The pastor, he's really struggling with this one. "Can't do devotions. What kind of Christian are you?" he's thinking. But he looks at her and he says, "Before, you were only learning about Christianity, but now you're living it." But this isn't a mother's only story club. It's true if you're a dad. It's true if you're a single, an adult, or a child, a teacher, or a student. The realities of life comes and it feels like you're trying to do everything, but you also feel like you're doing nothing for the kingdom of God. And it's exactly in this moment that Jesus is inviting you to reveal his glory. So today we are in John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, Jesus' first recorded miracle. And as we work our way through this passage, we're going to discover 3 ways that God has invited you to reveal his glory in the ordinary. But before we get to our passage, I'm just going to give you a little background on the Gospel of John, just so we kind of know where we're at. John is different from the other 3 Gospels in that it points to the deity of Christ, and John focuses more on the words of Christ as opposed to Christ's action. But still within the Gospel, John records 7 miraculous signs that Jesus does. And do you know what they are? Well, the first one is Jesus turning water into wine. And spoiler alert, he actually does it. The water becomes wine. But just as important as what these signs are is what they signify. You see, in Greek, we have 4 words that get translated into the one English word for miracle. And usually we think of the Greek word dynamis for miracle, and it's a demonstration of God's raw power. Man, he's so strong, he can do anything. But what John uses, the Greek word John uses for miracle in this gospel, is semeion. And that word, I think it's best translated as a sign miracle, or as an indicator. It's like early in the morning when you're driving up Saddle Road and you're going to work and you see the sign that says H3 West, and you're like, oh, there it is. So you turn left and you go on to H3 West. The sign isn't the road, it just points to something greater that is the road. And that's what John's revealing to us here, is that Jesus does these signs, but they're pointing to something of greater value than just the signs themselves. You know what they point to? John tells us at the end of his gospel, John chapter 20, verse 31, he says that these signs were written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. These signs that he writes about, including the one we're looking at today, point to your life in Jesus Christ. So now that we have a little bit of the background, we're going to look at our story. Go ahead and turn with me to John chapter 2. We're going to be in verses 1 through 11 today. And we're going to pretty much stay in that passage throughout the next 20 minutes. And so I'd like us all just to get re-familiar with the passage. I know this might be a familiar passage to many of you, but maybe it's been a while. So I'm just going to read the passage in its entirety, and I'd like you to try to picture what the story actually looks like. A lot of times it's easy for me, I know, just kind of zone out with the familiar passage, but let's just try to see the story in its entirety. I'm going to be reading from the Message. It's a paraphrase, so you can close your eyes and listen, or you can try to follow along in yours. But it's John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. I don't have a Message Bible, but I got it printed out, so let me read it to you. 3 days later, there was a wedding in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. Jesus and his disciples were guests also. And when they started running low on wine at the wedding banquet, Jesus' mother told him, "They're just about out of wine." So Jesus said, "Is that any of our business, mother? Yours or mine? This isn't my time. Don't push me." She went ahead anyway, telling the servants, "Whatever he tells you, do it." 6 stone water pots were there, used by the Jews for ritual washings. Each held 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus ordered the servants, "Fill the pots with water." And they filled them to the brim. "Now fill your pitchers and take them to the host," Jesus said, and they did. When the host tasted the water that had become wine, although he didn't know what had just happened, but the servants, of course, they knew, he called out to the bridegroom, "Everybody I know begins the feast with their finest wines. And after the guests have had their fill, he brings in the cheap stuff. But you saved the best till now." This act in Cana of Galilee was the first sign Jesus gave, the first glimpse of his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So there you have Jesus' first sign, water to wine at a wedding in Cana. But why this one? I mean, Jesus had all eternity past to think about what his first miracle on earth would be, to reveal himself, and he chose this one. Why? And why is it at a Jewish wedding? What does that symbolize? Or does it symbolize anything? And for maybe some of you conservative Baptists out there, was this actually alcoholic wine? Or was it grape juice? It's good questions. Let's see. Here's the setting of the story. We're in Cana. Where the heck is Cana? We don't really know. It's a really small, insignificant town that we don't know its exact location. That record has been lost. But what we do know is that it was in the region of Galilee, the northern part of Israel where Jesus grew up. But it was really just a basic, ordinary town. And something extraordinary was going on here. It was a Jewish wedding. Now, who's ever been to a Jewish wedding? Anybody in here been to a Jewish wedding? None of us? Me neither. I hadn't. But growing up, my parents made me watch The Fiddler on the Roof. Maybe some of us can relate to that one. Gave me nightmares for a while. Don't let your kids watch it. But I did learn a few things about Jewish weddings. They are parties, and parties to the max. They would go on for up to a week, and the husband and bride, they would get on people's shoulders, and they were dancing, and they were breaking cups, and it was a great, long celebration that kept going. So who are the characters of this story? Well, we got our main characters, Jesus, the servants, Mary. We have our supporting cast, the head waiter and the bridegroom. But interesting enough, the most important person at this wedding, the bride, she's not even mentioned. I have no idea why. But now the plot. And with any good plot comes a conflict. It's a Jewish wedding. Everybody's having fun. There's dancing, there's wine, there's feasting, but they run out of wine. This is a big deal in the culture. But I know that in our culture, we're kind of removed from the significance of wine, so I was trying to think. I was like, okay, how can I put this in today's cultural context so we can understand how serious of a problem this is? The Wi-Fi's out! Oh no, I can't update my story on Instagram. This was a big deal at this wedding. The couple would have heard about it for the rest of their lives. Their marriage would have been marred forever. They would have been known as that couple. You see, wine in this culture was an indication of the couple's joy and their celebration and their union. And to run out of it was a major social faux pas. But even if they had the money, they couldn't just go over to Target in Keizer and pick up another 30 bottles of wine. So how would they go and get all this extra wine if they needed to? Well, back then, how they got wine is you get a farmer. He goes out with his cart into his vineyard, and he picks by hand grapes that are ripe, and he puts them in his cart. And then he wheels his cart back to his wine press, which is a couple holes in the ground. He dumps the grapes, and then he takes off his sandals, and he starts squishing the grapes with his bare feet, juice flowing everywhere. And as the juice comes out of the grapes, it interacts with the wild yeast that's on the grape skins. And as it does that, it starts fermenting. And then it runs down into another cistern where it sits and ferments and becomes wine for a week. And then he comes back with his new wineskins and fills up the wine that's alcoholic, because they didn't have refrigeration back then. It's been fermenting for a week. This was a big deal to have to go get new wine for them. So you can go ahead, you can take out your sermon outlines. We're going to begin discussing the first way that Jesus has invited you to reveal his glory in the ordinary. I'm going to give you the first way now, and then we're going to digest it as we go. So the first way that you can reveal Christ's glory, your trust in adversity reveals Christ's glory. Your trust in adversity reveals Christ's glory. To partner with God to reveal his glory, you must trust him in the hardships. So let's see how we got there. John chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Let's start there. John 2, verse 1. It says this. On the third day. Well, on the third day of what? We don't know exactly, but most people believe it's the third day after Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. So on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, that little ordinary town. And the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, what? When the wine ran out? The wine never runs out. The passage makes it seem like, oh, we were at the party, then the wine ran out, and we just kept dancing. No, it's not like that. The wine never runs out. This was a big deal. The mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour has not yet come. Okay, I want to do something. I just want to clear my email inbox for the week. I want to talk about this part where Jesus says, woman. Because in the English, it sounds like he's saying, woman, not my Juliana. I mean, he sounds kind of sassy, right? So we look it up, and in the Greek, which is Pastor Perry's favorite, I like getting brownie points, so help me out. In the Greek, Jesus uses the Greek word gune for woman. He says, gune, my hour has not yet come. Basically, that's just a blanket term that just means woman. Positive, negative, it's just a blanket term. But Jesus uses it in the same way in John chapter 19 when he's hanging on the cross and he addresses his mother. He says, gune, woman, behold your son. And then he gives care of his mother over to John, his beloved disciple. Jesus uses this term in a very endearing way to his mom. But he doesn't use the term mother. He doesn't use mater. He just uses woman. It shows the significance that he's no longer a boy in his mommy's house and he's forced to obey her. But it's a cultural thing. And he's saying, no, now I'm a man, but I'm still called to honor you, my most cherished mom, my loving woman in my life. And so he chooses to honor her in this moment. And he says, my hour has not yet come. So what is going on here? If Jesus wasn't sassing, what do we discover in these first 4 verses? We discover adversity. So what is adversity? Adversity is getting a phone call from your husband who's on the mainland, and he's calling you from the ER saying he fell out of a tree, broke his back. You're stuck in Hawaii with 2 kids, and you have to figure it out on your own because your husband's doped up on narcotics. That's adversity. Sometimes adversity is really painful. You go through a long, difficult divorce, and there's a custody battle, and you lose, and you miss your kids. Adversity hurts. Adversity is you're going through life, and it's great. You got a beautiful wife and kids, and then you take your daughter to the doctors because she's sick. The doctor says, hey, this is something more than just a little cold, something serious. Adversity is painful at times. Sometimes adversity is a little more minor. It might be New Year's Eve and you still don't have a significant other, and so you're not going to go to town and watch the fireworks alone again. So you're going to go cozy up to binge watching Netflix, and so to get ready you go to Foodland and you walk in and you go to that magic frosted glass door we know about, and you open it and the cold air is billowing on you and you look, but there's no dryers, slow churned cookie dough ice cream. Oh, that's adversity. You know, to some, waking up with a cute little baby at night doesn't really seem like adversity. I know the first time I did it, 5 years ago with my son Truett, I had this beautiful moment. I was patting him on the back. He was crying real soft because he's in his first week of life. And look at my beautiful wife who's sleeping. And man, I'm the dad from the Hallmark movie. I'm feeling good about myself. 5 years in, 1,800 nights later, man, I am not the Hallmark dad anymore. It's just not happening. Adversity is the difference between a major surgery and a minor surgery. It's major when it happens to you. And it comes in different shapes, it comes in different sizes, but when it's going on in your life, it's real and it's hard. To us, running out of wine may seem like a minor thing. And in the grand scheme of eternity, it may be. But to this couple, it was everything. It was their marriage, it was their wedding, it was who they were for the rest of their lives. And the first time I taught this passage, I taught it to the youth group, I focused on this human adversity, and I said, that's the crux of this passage, is this human problem of running out of wine. But as I've continued to digest this passage throughout the last few months, I've realized that that's not the fulcrum of the passage. That's a very man-centered way to view it. But really, there's something greater going on here. There's a God-centered focus that's going on in this passage. And we see it in Jesus' words at the end of verse 4. Let's look at that. John 2, the end of verse 4. Jesus says, my hour has not yet come. So while we see adversity here, we all of a sudden see that this isn't just about a Jewish wedding running out of wine. Jesus says, hey, this is actually kind of paired to my hour, my big hour. Well, what's your hour, Jesus? And when's it going to come? Turn over a few pages. Let's go to John chapter 12, verse 23, 24. We're going to tag it with verse 32. John 12 records the events that happened 3 years after the water to wine miracle. It happens just after Jesus makes his triumphal entry into Jerusalem and presents himself as the coming king to the Jewish crowd. It happens just before his Last Supper with his best friends. Jesus says these words as he is knowingly walking towards his death on the cross. And this is what he says. John 12, verse 23 and 24, verse 32. Jesus says, the hour has come. Contrast that with 3 years earlier in John 2, my hour has not yet come. 3 years later, John 12, my hour has come. Your hour for what, Jesus? The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Jesus' hour is about his glory. Jesus' hour is about his glory. And he goes on to say how his glory is revealed. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Verse 32, and if I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men to myself. Jesus went through adversity. He died on a cross, a brutal death. And through that adversity, something miraculous happened. He was resurrected from the dead, and he offered salvation to all mankind. Through his adversity comes something glorious, and we all got to see it. But by saying my hour has not yet come in John chapter 2, he's saying, hey, the full realization of my glory, it's not yet going to be revealed. But you're also going through an adversity. And I'm going to give you a little glimpse of my glory here. You're going to get to see it in your adversity. And we see that as we continue on in the passage. You see, we only know this because we see it in hindsight. But Mary, she doesn't see all this. But even without seeing it, she says something profound in verse 5. Let's look at John chapter 2, verse 5. His mother said to the servants, whatever he says to you, do it. Boom. She just drops a trust bomb on the floor. She puts her complete trust in Jesus at this moment. She says, he's got this. Jesus is going to fix it. I trust him completely. And she tells the servants, you can too. So go do whatever he tells you. Mary trusts in Jesus, and you and I see that it's in this moment that Jesus has an opportunity to reveal his glory. Your trust in adversity reveals his glory. But that's not the only way that you can reveal Christ's glory. We're going to go on to truth number 2, the second way you can reveal Christ's glory in the ordinary. Number 2, your obedience in the mundane reveals Christ's glory. Your obedience in the mundane reveals Christ's glory. To partner with God to reveal his glory, you must be faithful in the normal, the ordinary, the boring. So let's continue in our story. John chapter 2, verse 6 and 7. Now there are set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews. Let's pause there for a second. You see, these aren't just any stone water pots. These water pots are according to the manner of purification of the Jews. What the heck is that? Got a really big book, and I opened it, and it told me. It's really fun. Between the 2 testaments, Old Testament and New Testament, there's about 400 years. And in this time, the Jews were developing some of their religious regulations that they were doing. The Pharisees were rising up, and they made all these practices that would point to how clean and holy and pious they looked on the outside for all man to see. And so what they would do is they would have all these ritual washing ceremonies where they'd take water, they'd wash their hands, their feet, they'd wash their cups and their cookingware, all to show how clean they were as men. But it was only an external thing. It wasn't anything about the internal change that God desires. So that's what these water pots are for, and all the guests at this wedding would have already had their hands and feet washed with this water. These water pots would have been empty. So let's keep reading. Verse 6. These stone pots contain 20 or 30 gallons apiece. And Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water. Do I have any math lovers out there? Any math lovers? You guys already done the math? 6 water pots, 20 to 30 gallons. 120 to 180 gallons of water. We're going with 180 gallons because it sounds better for the story. 180 gallons of water. That's a ton of water that these guys had to fill. And they probably already filled them up once and used them all already. And now they have to go and do it again. So how did they fill them up? I asked this question, I was like, how do you fill up 180 gallons in ancient Israel 2,000 years ago? I know what I would do now, stick it under the hose, and okay, 30 minutes later, I'm good. How did they do it? Well, Pastor Perry and I were talking about this, and he reminded me that in the Roman Empire, the Romans had perfected aqueducts. You would take with gravity and you'd get some water and you'd run it down at a certain grade all the way to where you needed it, and you'd have running water, you'd have flushing toilets, things like that. The Romans did have running water in their empire. But this was a small Jewish town. This was an ordinary town, insignificant. Would the Romans really go through all the resources to bring an aqueduct there? We have no idea because there's no record of this town. But if they didn't, which is a conjecture, these servants would have had to go to the nearest well, maybe in the center of the city, walk 5-10 minutes from the villa. They'd have to lower a bucket 100 feet down, bring it back up 100 feet, and then walk back to the villa and trip and spill the water and dump a little water into these buckets, and then go and do it again. Either way, if they had running water, it was a kind of boring but easy task. If they had well water, man, they were getting some pit stains. They were going through some hard labor to fill these up. So either way, it was hard or it was boring, but the job had to get done. But these servants, they must have been asking themselves and talking amongst each other, man, this doesn't even make sense. Who is this guy, and why is he telling us to fill up ceremonial cleaning water pots? We've already cleaned everybody's hands. We ran out of wine. We don't need to clean people's hands again. This didn't make sense to them. And maybe in your life, you're asking that same question. God, how can me waking up at 4:30 every day and then getting home after all the kids have gone to bed, how can that be what you called me to? And how can that be making a difference in this world? Or maybe, God, I keep reaching out to my friend, I keep texting her, but she's not responding. Is that really what you want? Is that really making a difference in her heart? Is that going to bring her to Christ? Or in my house, we asked the question, God, how is cooking another dinner really making a difference, raising my kids? Why do we have to do it every night, God? You could have made dinner an every other night thing. Kids get hungry every night. But we have these questions, these ordinary things we go through. It's like, God, does this really matter in the grand scheme of things? Or is this just something I gotta do that makes no difference? Either way, these servants, they're asked to do a boring task or a hard task that didn't make much sense. So who were they? Who are these lucky servants? What were the names? Well, when we read the text, we look at this word servants, and in Greek, the Greek word that's used here is diakonos. I've heard that one before. It means deacon a lot of times. We translate this word into deacon. Paul even describes himself as a diakonos in Colossians 1. Another way this word gets translated is minister. So these servants could have been volunteer ministers serving this party. Now the word does still allow them to be slaves, as you and I might be picturing the story. Oh yeah, they're just slaves, they're forced to do this. And maybe they are, maybe they're forced to do the work, but maybe they have a choice. And John chooses a word here that's either way, a choice or they're forced. And it's like us. Sometimes in our life, we have a choice in our obedience. God tells you to do something. Do you sign up for that service project that's going to be hard? You have a choice. Do you balance the checkbook this week? You know you should. Okay, you have a choice if you do it. But sometimes, you're like the slaves and you don't have a choice. Your husband just found out that mass that got biopsied, it's going to need radiation, and you're going to have to take him to doctor's appointments every week for the next 5 weeks. There's no choice there. Or your spouse gets a surprise deployment, and you're going to be at home with the kids for the next 6 months. There's no choice there. It's a task that has to be done, and it's on you. So if they were free men doing the work out of choice, if they were volunteering for the work, the task was there. Let's see how they responded. Let's look at John chapter 2, verse 7, the second part. We get to see how they responded. It says, and they filled them up to the brim. Now remember, John is writing this story, this event that Jesus did, because he wants you to believe in Jesus and to have life in his name. And he wants this sign to point to Jesus' life. And so he includes this little detail about how obedient the servants were. He didn't have to, but he did. He says they filled him up to the brim. Now, if they were slaves, they had no choice in the matter. They just had to do it without complaining. But if they were free men, they had a choice. Maybe they'd fill them up halfway. Maybe they'd get distracted on one of their trips to the well and go join another party. I don't know, but they had a choice if they were free men. But they decided to fill them up to the brim. They were obedient to Jesus' command fully. And to be obedient, they had to first know what his command was. And these servants, they only had 5 words of Jesus to obey. They had fill the water pots with water. Just 5. That's all they had, and they were fully obedient to them. Today, you sit in your seats with 782,815 words of Christ. And there is a mundane, boring, hard task before you. And you, sometimes, have a choice if you're going to fill them up to the brim. You're going to be obedient to Jesus fully. At other times, you don't have a choice. And Jesus has invited you to fill up your water pots to the brim. So regardless, if you're a mom, it's another day of blowouts, you're trying to squeeze in homeschool, or if you're going over the H3 in the poly, sitting in traffic 2 times a day, it's a choice you have if you'll be obedient. Jesus has called you to fill up water pots. Maybe hard, maybe boring, but you're being obedient to Jesus as you do. Your obedience in the mundane reveals Christ's glory. All right, quick review. 2/3 done. So far, we've seen 2 things that reveal Christ's glory. 1, your trust in adversity reveals his glory. 2, your obedience in the mundane reveals his glory. What's the last one? Number 3, your dependence on God's power reveals Christ's glory. Your dependence on Christ's power reveals Christ's glory. God's glory is revealed as you rely on his strength. Because so far in our story, we should have 180 gallons of water sitting in some water pots. Plain, simple, ordinary water. That's ready to clean some people's hands. Not too good of a story so far. Let's see what happens. John chapter 2, verses 8 through 10. And Jesus said to the servants, the ministers, the diaconoses, draw some out now and take it to the head waiter. So they took it to him. When the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water, they knew. The head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, every man serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. Apparently Jesus makes pretty good wine. But it's only by Jesus' power did that simple wash water turn into amazingly flavorful wine. The power wasn't found in Mary's trust. The power wasn't found in the diakonos' obedience. The power was only found in Jesus Christ. And that's where miracles come from. We're dependent on him. But Jesus invites you to participate in it. And he invites you to participate in that miracle through the adversity, through the mundane. And as you depend on his power, Jesus has an opportunity to reveal his glory. So which miracle are you participating in your life? When I was in college, I had a really pretty girlfriend who was madly in love with me and madly in love with Jesus. So I decided to marry her. She's standing outside right now, smiling. But we like to go on runs, me and this pretty girlfriend. And so we were running around the track one day, and afterwards we were stretching, and I noticed on her shoe that there was a Bible verse embroidered on it. It was Colossians 3:23 and 24. And so I couldn't really take out my smartphone. We didn't have them back then. But when I went back to my dorm afterwards, I looked up that verse in the good old-fashioned Bible. So let's read it. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 and 24. Colossians 3:23 and 24. And it says this. Whatever you do, Whether you're a stay-at-home parent, you're a working professional, you're in the military, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord. Not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance. So what inheritance did Mary and the servants in our story receive? What inheritance? And we see in verse 11. Let's go back to John. John chapter 2, verse 11, the end of our story. This is their inheritance. This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and Jesus manifested his glory. And the disciples believed in him. The inheritance they received was seeing Jesus' glory, and no one else got to see it. The head waiter, he didn't know where the wine had come from. He didn't know. The bridegroom, he maybe had no clue about the whole deal. But the servants, the ones who had gone through filling up those water pots with water, and it was hard and it was boring, they saw Jesus' glory because Jesus invited them to participate in it. So as you trust Jesus through your adversity, what's your inheritance going to be? You know, we have a great worship pastor, my friend, Pastor Josh, and he wrote an amazing song that he shared with us in the offering. It's called Set Your Mind. And as I was writing the sermon, the song just kept coming in my head, and I'm like, why is this song in my head? And so I started singing it, and I realized why. In it, Pastor Josh quotes Colossians chapter 3. So it's going to be our last verse of the day, Colossians chapter 3, verse 4. Colossians 3, verse 4. And it says this: when Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you will be revealed in glory. You will be revealed in glory. Your inheritance that you will receive is that you will be revealed in Christ's glory. And Jesus has invited you to partner with him in bringing about his glory here on earth. What water pots has Jesus asked you to fill this week? Let's pray. With our head bowed and our eyes closed, it's a private moment between you and Jesus. And this miracle points to something greater. This miracle points to your salvation in Jesus Christ. But it's a choice that you must make. And if you're here and you have never believed in Jesus, that he is who he says he is, the Son of God, that he came to earth to die for your sins, to raise from the dead, to give you a new life, this is your opportunity, your invitation to say, Jesus, I believe in you. Would you save me from my sins? Thank you, Jesus. And for the rest of us that are here, that we've already been saved, this is our invitation to come to Jesus and say, Jesus, I need your help in the mundane. I need your help in the adversity. So Jesus, we trust you in our ordinary, everyday lives. Jesus, would you give us your power to reveal your glory and your miracles? Would you give us the joy of every way to do it? It is in Jesus' name. Amen. Would you stand? We're going to close our time in worship.